Now, I'm more convinced than ever that LeBron James is now on the downside of his career. Now, those of you who want to press the thumbs down, please listen to what I'm saying. Okay, stop reacting to words and listen to what I'm actually saying. The downside means a downward gradual slope. It's not going to be a free fall where he just sucks all of a sudden. I'm just convinced now that he's past the apex of his career. Everything now is going to be a slightly, diminishing, gradual downward trend. Okay. Now, granted, there have been many players who were on the downside of their careers, but still were able to be very successful and ultimately win championships. All right. I always talk about Michael Jordan. The last three-peat, I think younger people who watch Jordan, I say, if you're 30 maybe and younger and you watch the last three-peat, you think that that was as good as Jordan was. If you watched him in the first three-peat, the prior three-peat, and before in the 80s, you could see the obvious decline. But he was so good and scary when he was in his prime. Even though he fell down, you know, from where he still was better than everybody else. Just not by miles and miles. So the talent around him obviously had to be a little bit better than it was in the early 90s. He needed more offensive players. He needed more defensive players because Jordan had slipped a little bit defensively. That's why Ron Harper and Dennis Rodman and hell, even Randy Brown, man. I think Randy Brown was a beast off the bench sometimes, man. I love Randy Brown. I love Jason Caffey. I thought they were very underrated bench players. But anyway, you have him as an example. Even Julius Erving. When they finally won the title in '83, Julius was slipping a little bit. He was still a very good player, but he wasn't what he was in the late '70s and definitely in the ABA days. But the Sixers put enough talent around him. That goes without saying. Bobby Jones, the defensive stalwart. You had Moses Malone, who was still at the peak of his powers. I think he was averaging like 24 points and like 14 rebounds a game or something like that. You had Andrew Toney, who Charles Barkley said was the best player he ever played with. All right. Andrew Toney, if he had not hurt his feet, if he did not suffer that foot injury, which robbed him of his career, he would have been a Hall of Famer. But there is no question about it. Andrew Toney was one of the best clutch players of the 1980s. All right. There's a reason why they called him the Boston Strangler. He was the reason why Boston ultimately got Dennis Johnson, because they had no answer for him. But the point is, the Lakers can still build a championship quality team around LeBron James. The difference is, as opposed to the Miami years, and even just a few years ago, he's going to need more firepower, I think, around him than he had with Cleveland and definitely with Miami. He's going to need more offensive pieces, and they're going to need more defensive players to make up for his lack of defensive ability. To me, honestly, the first signs that he was slipping as a player was his defensive deterioration. I mean, that's one of the first things that happen is you just lose a lot of your LeBron was never a defensively sound guy. He wasn't technically a brilliant defender as far as his footwork and his anticipations and whatnot. But just his sheer size and athleticism alone made him a very tough defensive player, especially against smaller players. But now LeBron James just doesn't have the energy to play defense at that. He can do it for stretches at times, but more often than not, you don't see it the effort like you did before. Pat Riley brought that out of him. And I think the best LeBron James that we saw was in Miami. And I'll go back to that in a moment. But I can see the gradual deterioration. There's things I look for on the court physically, and then there's things I look for when you look at numbers. Like I said, the defensive deterioration is there. The explosiveness, he's lost some of that. The athleticism. If you remember LeBron James during his first tenure with the Cleveland Cavaliers, there were times when guys just couldn't stay in front of him. And of course, in the earlier part of his career, defensive players could still kind of, hand checking was starting to be, phased out of the NBA, but you still could, nudge guys a little bit. It was still some physicality in the game. And LeBron James would just blow by defenders. And he would take it to the rack. And when he really got his game going, he would just continuously go to the rack. I remember one time he was playing against, I think it was the Detroit Pistons. I think it was that 48-point game that he had, right? I still think that's the best playoff game he ever had. And I remember him going to the rack. And I don't just mean dunking, I mean just going to the hole. I think he went to the rack 4 consecutive possessions. And he started out like a couple of times near the 3-point line. And he had just such a combination of speed, power, and athleticism. It was crazy. James can't do that anymore. Now, that happens to everybody. He can still dunk if the lanes are open. But James was able to sometimes, dunk over people when the lanes weren't even open. He could get to certain gaps. Now those gaps close before he even can get there. I noticed too that he gets his shot blocked a little bit more than he did when he was younger. James never had his shot blocked, unless it was an elite shot blocker. He rarely had his shot blocked when he was younger. He gets his shot blocked more often. He misses a little bit more in the paint than he used to. And those are some of the early telltale signs of players starting to slow down a little bit. But this is what I want to talk about a little bit was analytics, numbers. Now, I said this in a video a while back, right? But this is one of the first times, this is one of the things I look for. I'm going to use Michael Jordan as a reference. The 1990-91 season, the first year the Bulls won the championship. Now, remember, Michael Jordan was a 6'6", 200-pound guard. All right, he was a perimeter-oriented player. In that 82-game season, Michael Jordan shot 50% or better 59 times. Okay? The 91-92 season, during 82 games, he shot 50% or better 49 times. Still impressive, but a 10-game drop-off. But in the 92-93 season, that dropped off to 38 out of 82 games. And there were more and more of those clunker-type games. 9 for 25, 12 for 28, 9 for 24. You start seeing a lot of missed shots. By the last season of the dynasty, 97-98, Michael Jordan only shot 50% or better in 34 out of 82 games. And it was a lot of 10 for 28, 11 for 29, a 12 for 39 game, 9 for 27. It was a lot of clunkers. Now, this is what I noticed with LeBron James. 2012-13 season. I think that's the year they beat the Spurs when Ray Allen hit that miraculous shot, right? LeBron James at the absolute peak of his career, 28 years old. Now, in the 76 games that he played, right, he shot 50% or better 64 times. 64 times. That's 80, I think, like something like 84% of his games, he shot 50% or better. That's unbelievable. This year, while they're still young, of the 30 games he's played, 18 of the 30 he shot 50% or better. It's still 60% of his games. But this is a guy who's consistently has been amongst the league leaders in the field goal percentage. This year, he's down to 52%, which is still great, but that's down from 54% last year and 55% the year before that. So there's the gradual deterioration, and you see the clunkers. You see a few of these, just clunkers. 5 for 16 last night against the Wizards. There was a 5 for 15 game, a 9 for 22 performance, a couple other games. And more often than not, what I also notice is the off shooting nights from the perimeter. 1 of 7 from beyond the arc, 0 for 4, 0 for 6. You see that more. When LeBron was with Miami, his jumper had developed some consistency. Now we see a little bit more inconsistency, for him from outside. These are some of the things you look for. Now, it's still early, but I'm willing to bet that we're going to see, out of every 10 games, it's going to be 3 clunkers. More or less. Well, maybe not 3, but for every 10 games I think James plays, it's going to be 2 clunkers and a couple of off games, as opposed to that used to almost never happen. And then next year you're going to see a little bit more, to the point where he becomes a little bit more inconsistent offensively down the line years from now. These are what you look for. It's not something that happens all at once. These are things I look for. All right. So you might not agree with what I'm saying. You might say, "Oh, Mike, it's just whatever." But that's just what I'm seeing. Tell me what you guys think.